Good afternoon. It's Lee McWhorter. I'm the instructor for the cybersecurity program, and this is the first lecture or workshop for the Security Foundations class that began yesterday. Welcome to the program. Just a little sort of administrative up front. These sessions are meant to sort of supplement and complement the material online in this course, which is primarily a conceptual sort of setting the stage for future classes. And this will be more lecture than workshop, but as you move into other courses throughout the program, we'll have a lot more workshop than lecture in many cases, showing demos and working on the different tools that we work with. As a quick overview for you as you're beginning, like I said, this class is a introductory concept class. A lot of these concepts are very important though, not only from the point of view of needing to know this information in your future career and taking, say, the Security Plus exam or other certification exams, but also because these concepts just come back again and again. They come back in future classes. We use them again when we're thinking about other aspects of security. And so obviously we'll cover the material and make sure that we give you some additional information just to go with what's on in the learning system online. Most of the courses in our program are 10 lessons long. So in effect, if you can do one a day, you're rocking, right? And technically the due dates are kind of Wednesday weekends. So, first couple modules are due by Wednesday. The next ones are due by the end of the week. And we just kind of have that tick-tock pattern. Then again, the next Wednesday, a couple more modules are due, and then everything's due by that final Sunday. Absolutely. You're really trying to shoot to get it done by the Saturday of that last, because we can have a huge rush on people doing everything at the last minute on Sunday. So we try to encourage you to get done earlier. Make time available. Obviously, we have one-on-one sessions and the Slack channel and all kinds of resources to help you out. And then as we go through the program, like I said, this course is mainly conceptual. You'll see that we switch and kind of go the other direction, mainly hands-on, only a few conceptual lessons in the Network Foundations class. We kind of go a little bit of a split, a little bit back conceptual with in the system admin. Then in the middle, we kind of flip it all around. 2 out of 3 classes are much more hands-on than conceptual. Though there's hands-on elements in all courses, of course, in one form or other of exercises and projects. And then as you get into the later tier, we start, rounding things out with programming and project management, as well as our capstone threats and vulnerability class, which is very hands-on oriented, all leading towards your final group project. So that's sort of an overview. That's the program and how we work. What I do with these video lectures is, given that most of the classes, there are a few exceptions you'll see much later in the program. A few classes are in a different model and still need to be redone to fit the new 10 lessons model, but don't worry, the content's the same. So when you get to web security and it says it's 16 modules, it's not that much. It's actually less than 5 modules because it's actually only 1 week of that course. So, but we'll talk about that when we get to that class. But most are 10, and so in principle, I cover the first 5 lessons in each of the lessons, or 5 lessons per. And the next week, of course, we'll have another lecture workshop and cover the last 5. And like I said, where appropriate, we'll do some demos and hands-on, etc. So in this class, the first chapter is, obviously very introductory. We start defining things like what is security even, and definitely what is information security, cybersecurity. What is it that we're trying to do? And in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is to protect the informational assets of an organization and our roles in cybersecurity. And there's a number of different roles. We'll talk about those in a minute. So, it comes down to it's the information that we're really trying to protect. But I say the informational assets because that also then includes the technology that information is being accessed by, the networks, the servers, the systems that we use, the desktops and everything. So that whole sort of ecosystem, but at the core, it's the information. It's the customer list. Obviously, we don't want that breached, like we keep reading about so many of those. We want to keep, if we're a software company, our proprietary software is proprietary, so some competitor doesn't steal it. We want to keep, our customers safe, our employees safe. It's almost impossible to find an organization that doesn't have something private, something that they need to keep. And so that is at the core what our mission is. And there is in this first chapter a very important concept called the CIA triad. And we're not talking about the Central Intelligence Agency. We're talking about the promises we in cybersecurity effectively make to the organization we are working for or working with. And that is the CIA. And what that stands for is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are super important things that we in security have to do. I mean, the first one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Like I said, most companies have some kind of information that they need to keep private. It may be nothing more than their employees, but laws, maintain, require us to maintain privacy of our employee personnel files. Obviously, if we have customer data and important customer data like credit cards or social security numbers or addresses, emails, etc., we need to keep that private. And there are more and more laws coming into effect, even in the States, but particularly in Europe, which, of course, because of the World Wide Web, we need to be aware of all those things. And we'll talk about those as we go through the program and learn about different types of laws and processes and even some of the templates we can use to help set up security processes actually next week. So confidentiality is pretty straightforward. Most people get that. We're trying to protect the hackers from getting in and get our data and breaching our information, trying to protect competitors from getting our proprietary processes and source code and product pricing and marketing plans and things like that. And then, so integrity, what is integrity? Well, integrity is about making sure that the data doesn't change in an unexpected way. There's the old famous movie, even referencing the courseware in a different context, but the War Games movie, which shows back in the 80s, this kid dialing in, and his first thing that he does as a hack is he dials in and he's basically changing the grades in the school database. That is an integrity violation, right? That's not something we want to happen. We don't want somebody to say, we're a software company, break in and inject malware or a backdoor into our software. We don't want somebody to, change the amount that we're owed by our customers, and things like that. So we want to maintain the integrity of our data. It's very important. Of course, data changes, but we need to have a mechanism, or mechanisms in many cases, to make sure that we know why and who changed it. That's why we usually require logins, right? Logins not only to an individual's workstation, but either through some kind of access control management, which we talk about later in another course in more detail, or just having individual logins. A smaller company, somebody might log into their desktop and then log into QuickBooks. But through that chain, we know that Sally, made that update to the accounts payable because somebody, paid a bill, or we paid a client, and so we updated that. Kind of got the backwards. Accounts receivable, and we updated if we got money from a client, or payables, we updated for paying somebody else. But nonetheless, and of course, in a more, a bigger system, we might log in once to our desktop and be, say, on a Windows Active Directory system, and be able to then access all different kinds of resources because, that's been set up by administration for us. And we've been given them, ideally, the rights we need so we can get the data we need and get our job done. But we can't necessarily change everything. So that's all part of, learning how to set up permissions, and we'll talk about that in later courses as well. But there has to be some mechanism so that we can maintain the integrity of the data. And those are the two that I think most people can wrap their minds around, just, seeing examples on television, movies, reading stuff in the news about breaches and hacks and exploits and things that have happened. And so those are the ones that, most people come into the field really kind of, okay, I get that. That makes sense. That's the ones they're thinking about, even active people in the field. Protect against the hackers, save the data, throw up the firewall, encrypt everything, yada, yada, whatever, all the things we're going to learn. But sometimes people forget the last one, the A, availability. And this is a really critical one, because I always tell students, and I really want students to understand this, we do not do security in a vacuum. It's not security for security's sake. Our whole role, all of these things we're going to learn, CIA, defense in depth, all these concepts and techniques and principles that we're going to learn throughout this program are not done just for security's sake. They are done within the bigger picture of, we have to empower our organization to succeed. I mean, because if you look at a simple example, like sort of, an ideal world, of course, there's security administrators that would love to have, 100, 156 character passwords that change every hour. That's super, super secure ostensibly, right? It's hard for somebody to be able to compromise a password and get in if it's changing all the time. But the reality is that's so complex that, of course, then people cheat and we end up with a bigger problem. They stick their number up, they share passwords, they all kinds of things that people will get their job done, right? They'll work around. So we have to realize that there's a trade-off. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But we're same thing with permissions. I made that reference. That person in accounting needs to be able to access the accounting data to do their job. We have to give permissions and make the data available. That's the availability piece. We have to make it available to the organization where it's needed. Managers have to be able to look at management data and be able to help make decisions and decide contracts and purchasing and forecasting. Accounting people have to have accounting data so that they can deal with the billing and the payroll and all the different things that are going on. Our programmers have to have access to their systems and their code and their repositories so they can get their job if we sell software. Or in this day and age, more and more companies are just building software to support their organizations, building their very feature-full website. And these all have to be made of, we have to make this data that we're also trying to make confidential and keep the integrity of, we have to make it available. So we can't forget the availability side because security is not in a bubble. Our goal is to empower the organizations to succeed. At the end of the day, if the organization fails, whatever that is, if that's a company selling widgets, if that's a nonprofit trying to help people, if they do not accomplish their objective and they do not continue to sell that product and make money, they do not continue to serve those needs of nonprofit and get donations, we're out of a job. And so so this is where this trade-off, because there's a huge trade-off between security and convenience, right? Matter of fact, there's a chart in the thing, there's an inverse relationship between those two. And you can see that in that password example. If you have a simple password, that's easy. 4-digit PIN, I can remember that, sure. But that's easier to hack. There's only 10,000 combinations. 156 character password, much more complex, but much more complex to remember. People are going to write them down, stick them on a Post-it note on their monitor. And now our security is actually weaker than we thought it was, or people are sharing passwords. So we have to constantly in our field balance that, the desire for security, the need for security against we have to make the data available. We have to empower the organization. And we're going to see throughout this course and throughout this entire program that those trade-offs are constantly got to be in mind. If you're setting up, the system just for a new user, what are you going to do? What permissions does that user need to get their job done? Do they need to be able to install software on that machine? If they do, then we have to balance that with giving that user the right to install software means that there's a bigger risk that they can install the wrong software or install malware, right? But of course, if we lock everything down too much, then the person may not be able to get their job done. And so, as we're going to see a little bit next week and scattered throughout the course, one of the big things that we look at is we try to understand all these concepts and then ultimately put together an organizational security policy. And we have to use a lot of techniques and principles to do that. And we have to play a balancing act. We have to look at our situation, and every organization is going to have a slightly different set of needs and requirements and a set of different risks that they face. And then they're going to have to go through the process of what you're going to learn and decide which things to do based on this perceived risk, based on budgets and all kinds of things like that. So the first chapter, talks about all those basic definitions, key terms. I try to supplement. Like I said, I'm just not going to read you the material. You can do that and listen to the videos. But I kind of want to emphasize the key things. And of course, one of the big things that's also just kind of covered, so I'll touch on briefly, is that the growing challenges we face. The world, I've been doing this since dial-up modems and computers that just had kilobytes of memory. And, hacking's been going on pretty much forever. You could argue that while it's not exactly the same, it's similar enough. We call a certain type of malware called a Trojan, which was a reference back to the Trojan horse. People have been manipulating, people have been trying to, break systems and break in, pick locks and do things ever since the analog world. And all of those skills and thoughts have just moved into the digital world. And so we have people trying to do bad things, trying to break into things, trying to defraud people, trying to steal things in the digital world. And so, but that's been there since the beginning. But what's really made this field explode is just the sheer size, right, and the growing number of challenges. You can't hardly, shake a stick, in a newspaper stand without hitting an article, about every day you turn around, there's some new breach. Some companies lost 1 million records, 100 million records. It is insane the amount of security lapses that happen, the amount of breaches that happen, and the sheer growth of the internet from when I started with just, so many geeks on the internet connected, maybe through dial-up, or maybe if they were lucky, like even when I started, as well later in college, got a little bit better connectivity that way. But and it's just, there were only so many of us. There were only so many computers. There were literally, back in the 90s and 80s, it was all nothing much, relatively speaking. It's huge. Actually, I shouldn't say it that way. It downplays it. But it was a small subset of people in universities and research facilities, etc., that were using the internet until really the web was created. When the web came along and brought it to the masses, then the internet has just exploded. And we're still running on the same internet backbone that we started with. And we're doing all these new cool, fancy, schmancy things on them. But that is part of the sheer challenge, because many of these apps are vulnerable. All these new services could potentially be exploited. These new devices that are starting to come on. People have, smartphones that are more powerful by a long shot than the earliest computers I had, or even the supercomputers of those days. We carry them around in our pocket. And, lots of places in the developed world have even skipped the PC and just gone straight, for the most part, to a smartphone or device type of internet. And then we're talking about things like the Internet of Things now, where basically we're putting computing power and connectivity into everything. And so you're going to learn about, and I'll give you over lectures and a number of different examples of where those kind of things are now causing breaches. And so these are the challenges we face, and why this field is really exploding. Why there are so many unfilled jobs. It's like programming in its own way. It's a challenging field. There's a lot to learn, but it's also very fun and rewarding as well. So actually, when we move into lesson 2, and I'll try to go through this one pretty quickly, we talk about security roles. We decided to put it right up front because it's important for a couple of reasons. One, in the very beginning of that lesson, there is some discussion about what we call conceptual roles. And they're important to understand because it's a way to subdivide the employees into different classifications based on their role in the security framework within our organization. And as we're going to talk about next week, when we talk about some of the templates and what we call frameworks that help us build an organizational security policy, you might find reference, and would likely find reference to these roles. So like being a data owner or a custodian of the data, or as really is the case, most people in an organization, all different levels, even senior people, are just users from the point of view of us, security people. The owners of data are people that, might be the VP of sales owns the sales database. And that person's going to be able to provide us some insight into how important it is, how critical it is, and help us value, and rank that so we can protect it and maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that data. For them, somebody's going to be the custodian of that data. In many cases, it might even be multiple people, both from the point of view of system admin as well as the security side. And then, of course, the vast majority of people, even, assistant VP of sales and everybody else in that organization is just a user. And so there's different policies and different roles and different, that those conceptual roles come into play. But the rest of the lesson is really about the different roles that are more realistic, practical examples of roles in sort of introduction, intermediate, and advanced places within the cybersecurity profession. So you might start off as a security analyst, decide that you like to, do the white hat hacking, break things, if you will, attack things. So you over time, move toward more skills on that side, and you might ultimately end up in an advanced pen tester role, working for an organization as an internal pen tester, part of their red team maybe. We'll talk about all these things later, but that they represent the attacking side and the red team, blue team exercise. So stuff like that. Or of course you might decide that you like the defense side more, the blue side more, so you learn more about configuring firewalls and managing intrusion detection. And in this program, we're going to learn a little bit of everything. And as you go further, there's kind of a little bit of a split that can happen. Even CompTIA is building that into their certification, After the Security Plus, there's two intermediate certs. One is the Red Team Attack Side, Pen Test Plus, and one is the Blue Team Defense Side, Cybersecurity Analyst Plus. And then both of those can go on to their Advanced Security Practitioner, their capstone exam and certification. So you can see that even the industry itself is seeing that we kind of need to divide. Our program takes us about halfway through. It sort of gets you through Security Plus and a good chunk into both of those other areas, and then you could decide where to go from there. We're looking at different options of how we may expand the program in future to dovetail with that. But for now, it's important to understand these roles, and we thought it would be a kind of a useful exercise, especially for some of the younger students in the program, more maybe than others that have work experience, to get an idea of thinking ahead of, oh, these are the different paths I might take. And if we present that to you now, then you can have that in the back of your mind as you go through the program and decide, what resonates more with you. If you like this side or that side, then that'll help make some decisions. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on 2. It's pretty straightforward. A fun one is 3, though. We start to, okay, we've covered, okay, what is security, what is cybersecurity, what are we doing? We're protecting the digital assets and all of the equipment and information that goes to make that happen and to empower that organization. We're balancing security versus convenience, and as we're going to learn, we're going to have to take a lot of other things into account. But one of the things we obviously get, if we understand what that's now, then who are we protecting against? And so lesson 3 is all about the different types of attacks and what we call threat actors. Threat actors are the people who can carry out an attack. And so what kind of attacks are there? Well, there are a lot, and you're going to get to do some of them throughout the program, and of course learn how to defend against them as well. But I like to break them up into 2 areas. There's sort of what I call standard attacks. Attempting to log in as somebody else, right? That has happened from the beginning. It's like first computer play went on the internet, probably not very much later, somebody was trying to log into that computer to see if they could get in. And so this kind of stuff obviously continues to this day. Now it's automated. It can be what we call brute forced. We can run a program and just pound away on a machine trying various combinations of username and passwords. Maybe we've stolen an encrypted password file or gotten access to it through some other breach. Well, we can pound away on that. And so there's all those, just trying to get access to a system, escalate access and rights once you get on a system, standard kinds of attacks, and even things like what we might call they're just kind of mean attacks in a way. They don't steal any information. They just take you down. Denial of service, DOS, or sometimes referred to, depending on how they're carried out, as DDoS, for distributed denial of service. So there's all these different attack types, and of course, frauds and scam and spam and things. These are all standard. We've all, maybe not all experienced a breach, but we've experienced some of these things: social engineering, phishing emails, and various types of potential attacks. But then there's all these newer attacks. Now, many times the newer attacks are just new variants of older attacks. So in a sense, if denial of service, the idea of just overwhelming a server with so much traffic that it goes offline and it can't respond and do its job, is an old attack. And then distributed denial of service is kind of in the middle, but it's really taken off in this modern world because, and actually two out of the top 3 largest bandwidth thrown at a target as part of a denial of service attack were actually DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. And both of them fit into what I mentioned a minute ago about the challenges, because they were both done via just a swarm of little IoT devices, Internet of Things devices like baby cams and smart thermostats and home routers and just all kinds of things that these attackers were able to, find a weakness, default passwords, misconfigured, never patched, whatever. They were able to get in and basically capture, take control of thousands, hundreds, millions of these devices. And then they've now we refer to this as a botnet. They've turned all these machines into their robots, their bots, that they can do what they want to. And then they say, okay, all of you that I have control of, I want you all to, it could be as simple as, I want you all to ping that machine. And so all these requests from millions of machines just flood those servers and take them off the net. The new part is, of course, there wasn't even that many devices 20 years ago on the entire net. And now there's a whole class, millions of them, and more coming. As a matter of fact, the numbers of how many we expect to have in the coming years are almost mind-boggling. And then if you continue the growth of people getting more computers and getting more smartphones and more servers and more virtual servers in the cloud, and we'll talk about that too in this program, you can just see that this takes off. But then there's even newer types of attacks that are just directed at some of these things. The hacking conferences every year, there's people showing, oh look, I can mess with the in-flight control systems technically through this on a plane through this in-flight entertainment system that I've gotten Wi-Fi on the plane and I hacked them around, or that we can remotely stop a car or things like this. Former Vice President Dick Cheney had a smart pacemaker installed, but he had them disable the ability to talk to it remotely through, I think it was a Bluetooth effectively, so that like you could go in and a doctor could put up a device and they could get the information, but and he could tweak the thing and it could be controlled through that device. And Cheney was like, no, somebody will try to assassinate me that way. And technically, theoretically, that's possible. We are facing that kind of thing. I mean, it's just one example, and I won't go into the details yet. I'll probably talk about it in another class. But last August, we came within this much of having a world first episode, and that being that a hack almost caused physical damage in the real world, and not just damage, but death and destruction type damage. We've already seen that hacks can do physical damage. We have seen things like, and we'll talk about these, but like the Stuxnet virus that was sent against the Iranian centrifuges to destroy them, damage them, and slow down their efforts at potentially enriching uranium. We've seen Ukrainian power stations, and power grid taken offline because of attacks against physical attacks. So digital world is now beginning to impact the real world. And in August of last year, and most of the story is only beginning to come out this year, but a refinery in the Middle East came this close to literally being blown up. The analyst and the research I've done into this, the researchers say that if there had not been bugs in that code, that it would have succeeded. In other words, the attackers were just not quite there. So we are within. I would not be surprised if it's before the year's out. If not this year, then next. Within the next year or so, we are going to hear about a power plant, a chemical plant, some kind of thing that literally blew up. And the reason it's going to be turned out is that hackers were able to hack in and mess with systems, change the pressures of gauges, change the cooling or the heating, right? But report back to the control room, everything's fine until it overloads and goes boom. And they came that close to it. So there are all kinds of new attacks, and that makes the world a scary place to a degree, but it also makes it an exciting place and thus an exciting field as we potentially get a chance to work in those areas and learn how to defend against those areas. Threat actors, of course, there's some names you're going to start seeing them. At the lowest level, we use the phrase script kiddie. And what this is a reference to, this is usually the amateur level, right? Because it is amazing how easy it is. You're going to see how easy it is by the time this program's over. And I always joke, every year at Christmas, there's a whole new crop of script kiddies born because they get their first computer. And of course, most kids, when they get a computer, they go jump online and play games with their friends, or this day and age, the world is moving that way, right? They jump on social media and connect with hey, I got a computer, well, let's just be friends on Facebook or whatever the latest site that the kids like. But nonetheless, a few of them, a certain percentage, and I've been doing this for a long time. I run servers, monitor logs, do all kinds of different aspects, and I've watched servers, and I can tell you, I can see after Christmas into the new year, a little uptick in the amount of attacks and probes and things that are going on. And it happens every year. It's like clockwork. And that's because, a certain percentage of kids, people, when they finally get their first computer, instead of going to play the game or jump on with their friends' social media, a certain percent immediately go to some hacking site, download a few tools, and start doing it. Now, of course, some of them get caught early, make stupid mistakes, do it all from home with no obfuscation at all. So, But of course, some don't, and some learn, and they get better and better. Some of them join our program and go on to be white hat hackers. But then the ones we're talking about here are the ones that move up the chain, say they, in some form or fashion, usually become some form of a criminal hacker. That's usually the next step after being a script kiddie. And criminal hackers can be, mildly skilled all the way up to very sophisticated. There are gangs even of in different places where people are very sophisticated. And then, of course, as you move up higher and higher, you ultimately start running into the more experienced hackers. And ultimately, in this day and age, what we call the nation state players. Almost every country in the world has a team, if not multiple teams, of people, both for attack and defense. And whether that is, corporate espionage to steal data from more advanced countries so that they can use that tech in their country, give it to their companies, or if that's just, classic global espionage, trying to spy on the neighbors and the enemies and the allies. This is becoming, and has been now for a while, and continuing to grow, a big important area. And we even have another acronym. We got lots in our industry, but APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. At that level, at the highest levels of the criminal organizations, but even more so than the persistent, the nation state actors, we will see that they're not just hitting and going, running, hit and run, break in, get something, and get out. They're breaking in quietly, leaving back doors, leaving and being there for a while. So, and it amazes me sometimes that big corporations have had, credit card skimmers on their machines for months and nobody noticed it. That the breaches happen, people have been in there, they've been slowly pulling data out, and because obviously you can't take 100 million records in one night. That should set a bell, right? So, but they're smart enough, they'll get in and then they'll take a batch and take a batch and take a batch and send this stuff off. But this is what we're going to learn, how some of this happens. And then, of course, through things like firewalls, intrusion detection, logging, monitoring, all the different techniques, how we can defend against it, of course. Lesson 4 is, once again, an important, and actually the middle few lessons we'll be finishing up here with 4 and 5 for this day's lecture workshop. But 4 is about information security. And there's some important concepts in there. There's one word, which is the word control. But in the context of, anytime we put something into place to attempt to protect these informational assets, we call it a control. So if we implement a password policy, that's a control. If we implement, firewall rules, those are controls. And so the lesson's all about the different types of controls. There's technical controls, procedural controls, etc. And like I said, I'll leave you to, but I want you to take the important. You're going to see that. You'll see that word in those templates and documents for wherever you go to work. These are our security controls in our policies and procedures. And we are, of course, attempting to protect the information. And there's a really nice chart or picture in there. I guess the graphic's okay. I think it's black and white, but conceptually, it's a good graphic because it shows at the very center, here's the data. And then you see these products, kind of, you can think of that as the computers, the networking, the routing, the firewall, all those things. And then there's the people as another layer out. And these are the people who use these products, right? Use the systems, you set up the firewalls, etc. And then there's these policies or procedures. And so what we're saying is that what an organizational security is about, or information security about, is we ultimately, for our organization, want to create a set of policies, a security policy for the organizational security policy. And that policy is really, of course, a whole bunch of policy documents, acceptable use policy, password policy, firewall configurable policy, all these different documents. However, and some of it's not maybe labeled a policy. There's guidelines, there's policies, there's procedures, a whole series of documents in the broad sense, the policies, the outer circle, they basically are what's there to, educate and instruct the people on how to use the products in such a way that we end up protecting that data, right? So password policies put in place so everybody knows what's the password policy when they use different systems or log into the system. We would have, say, guidelines and procedure documents on how we would want our firewall configured. Why would we want to do that? Well, we might need to add a new firewall, or what if the old one breaks and we have to get a different model? So we can't just copy the config over. We need to have it documented. Why? Because then we can update when we get the new router. We have a policy, that guideline documents that tell us, okay, well, our firewall standing policy is we block everything. We let port 80 in over here to the firewall, to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, to our live web server. But we block other stuff unless it's been requested. Maybe we have to open a few other ports for whatever reason, but we've got that documented, so we know. But there's actually another reason beyond being able to say, yeah, the old router's dying, we're buying a new one. Here's the policy. Here, go set it up that way. That's cool. But the other part is that we need to audit every so often. We have to check ourselves. This is a continuous cycle. Security is not a goal. Even reading the entire security doc, is huge. Here's all the documents. I've done it. I'm done. My job, my work is done. No, it's a never-ending cycle, our job. Because once we create a security policy and put all this in place, then we have to monitor it, manage it. We have to audit it. So we would want to go occasionally and take out that policy, and somebody goes over, that's not the person responsible for that. Ideally, there might be just a system admin who manages that firewall following the policy, but a security admin may come behind every so often and audit and make sure that nothing's changed. Okay, our standing firewall policy is this. Let me compare that to the firewall rules in place. Or if you had a regulatory reason and some outside auditor came in, that's what they would do. They would go to your policies, what you say you're doing, and go see if that's what you're doing. And if your guys out in the field have opened up a couple more holes in the firewall to let stuff through for the development team, and that's actually opened up a potential risk, now we're in deviation, right? And so we create these policies to help guide the people in how to use the products in a way that we ultimately protect that data. Now, there is a really important concept that you'll see a reference to actually just across. It's not even tied to just security, IT period. As a matter of fact, it's even labeled that, the IT infrastructure, but it's what's called the 7 domains. And the idea is that we're going to be able to take the organizational infrastructure, IT organizational infrastructure, and break it up into chunks so that we don't have to try to, because you think about it, okay, here, just a few lessons in, I know what security is. I know there's all these different possible roles. There's all these different people who are going to be part of the organization. They got to be part of it. There's all these potential risk and hackers coming in. And I know I'm going to have to, be part of creating some kind of organizational policy. But how in the heck do we do that? Yeah, wow, if it's just you at home, that's, pretty simple, small company, right? But as you grow, you're going to have to expand and do things. And if you go work for a bigger organization off the bat, then, oh, wow, well, how do we create one for this organization? Well, thankfully, we don't have to create from scratch. Next week, we'll talk about some of the frameworks. But the other thing here is the 7 domains. And what it does is it breaks up a typical IT infrastructure into 7 different domains. There's the user domain. That's the domain of the people. That's your users. They log into computers. They use rugged devices. They use a point of sale system, whatever. They use a tablet. We don't care. They're the users. And so what policies do we need for them? We need acceptable use policies, password policies, various things that training, various things that affect the user. That's how we can improve security, by doing those things in that area. Then the workstation domain, that used to just be workstations, PCs, but today it can be, like I said, rugged devices, tablets, smartphones, all those devices, everything. And so we have, what are our rules and policies here? Every machine has to have antivirus. We have to have some kind of mobile device management. We have to have, blah, 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 on and on rule. So we can now just look at that and say, okay, well, that's a logical group, right? They're probably, we're going to need on any end user device, that's probably a logical and a good security policy. We're going to need some kind of antivirus. And so, different companies will choose different solutions and different ways to do it. Maybe they picked one solution and deploy it globally. Maybe because of the sheer depth of devices, they have multiple, but they're going to have a policy, and it's going to say, if you're on Android, you're going to install this. If you're on this, you're going to do this. Or maybe they don't even get the choice, right? Because the policies tell the IT team how to set up a new computer. And so when somebody gets hired, here's your new computer, here's your new phone. Everything's already set up because policy says so. But that's the workstation. Then, of course, the workstations by themselves are kind of useless. In this modern world, we got to have a connection, so we have a LAN. So what do we need to do in our LAN? What are our policies? What are our access rights? What are our, so we, on and on. We have the WAN domain, it's the 4th. That's a wide area networking, very critical one. And most people think about that. Yeah, we got to have firewalls and something to stop those hackers. But as we're going to learn, we can't just depend on that. We got to really look at the whole totality of all this, because the attackers are very creative, and there's a thing called social engineering, right? Where people where your people are your weakest link. Somebody tries to manipulate them in some way, shape, or form into allowing them access. And so then of course, most companies these days have some form. They may be on site, on premises. They may be hosted somewhere else, like I do for clients, or it could be up in the cloud. Of course, what I do is the cloud. It's not exactly the way Amazon does it, but yeah, the cloud is hosting. And we'll talk more about the cloud, but the cloud is huge. And another one of these, like the Internet of Things, this growing area. Basically, the cloud is virtual computers, virtual servers. People are deciding that is the way to go. Instead of having to set up their own data center, they can piggyback on Amazon and Google and all the big boys, who will basically rent them so much processing and capability. And as you're going to learn, if you haven't done it yet in the next class, you'll be learning about virtualization in detail. We use a lot of virtualization tools in this program, so that'll become clear as we go forward. And then, of course, most people do have some servers. They have an accounting server, they have a file server, they have a print server. So we have a server domain. And as you can see, these domains, then it allows us to conceptually break up the entire network and take it into chunks, right, to help. And of course, it's a logical grouping. And then last but not least, the remote access domain. So the last lesson we're going to talk about, and we'll finish up today with these concepts and then pick up some more next week, is lesson 5, defense basics. And I'm going to say this again and again, so you might as well get used to it. But this and a lot of these concepts, most of these concepts from this, you'll see again and again. But definitely some of this from chapter 5 and 6, or lesson 5 and 6. Because if you really, they're not hard. I expect you'll get them, you can answer a question, boom. But you really need to just instill them into how you think now as you go forward. Because we're talking about the first one, and really the most important one by far, is the concept of defense in depth, or layered defenses. I always use one analogy every time, and that's a castle. It's the best. Most people can relate, at least seen one on television, even if they're not into fantasy gaming and all that kind of stuff, or history. They've seen a castle. And so if you think about a castle is the perfect example of defense in depth. If you've ever seen one, particularly, even on TV, but definitely in real life, toward Europe or a few places that a few castles exist. They're not quite the same in America, more decorative than functional. But if you really look at a real castle, one that was back in those days, and somebody built to defend against the neighboring enemy, for example, one of the first things you'll see is that usually you'll see the castle, or they will see you, because either a castle many times is up on a hill, so it has a great line of sight, or as I've even seen, a castle's in a more flat part of the world, and they would have clear cut thousands of yards around, even if there's forest. Why? Because they want to be able to see that army. They don't want the army to slip up through the trees and get right to the wall. They need this first open area. We can see them coming from a long way away. So that's their first line of defense. And then, of course, as the army starts to march up and it's going to surround the castle, maybe we're going to do a siege. Well, the reason they go in that is because they can't quite get to it. There's that moat, right? We pulled up our drawbridge. So here's our next line of defense. And maybe that moat's filled with something we can light on fire, or piranha, or, in fantasy, it's got sea dragons or whatever. Maybe that's what you tell the enemy. It's burning oil is probably more practical. Just nasty stuff, whatever it is that's going to dissuade them from crossing it, and cause them a problem in crossing that chasm, bringing their catapults and battering rams close enough, catapults from a distance can attack, but the battering rams and their people and their ladders and things. And then, of course, even if they can cross that, which you probably can, given enough time, we're sitting there shooting down arrows, right, and throwing oil and catapult stuff on them. And we have, of course, that huge wall with all those battlements and little slits so we can shoot arrows through. And then, of course, there's the portcullis with all the gates, and many castles, especially if you've toured them or looked at them architecturally, there's multiple layers of those walls. Like, they can fall back to an inner wall. And then even the inner castle part, the part where the king and queen, whoever, the royal family or whatever it would be, is another defended enclave. that is the analog, the old school. And if you can think of a military base today, outpost, guard, towers, dogs, cameras, all the way back in layered defenses. We have to do the same thing. We cannot put all our eggs in one basket. We cannot say, hey, I got a firewall. Great. I'm good, right? No, you're not. So we need multiple layers of defenses. And these defenses are going to take the form of technology, firewalls, intrusion detection, things like that we're going to learn about. They're going to take the form of policy, which once again, we're going to learn about all these things, policy, and we're going to take the form of different approaches even as we move into next week and some of the subtopics of other defense concepts. But related to layered defense and defense in depth is the idea that of what we call separation of duties and job rotation. The idea being that, if say you're a mid-sized company, whatever, you got so many people on your IT/and/or security teams, and Sally runs the mail server and builds your database admin, and on and on, and or better yet, but then there's a couple of your sort of super admins, and they have everything, right? They have access to everything. Well, the problem with that is, of course, they can do anything. You put all your eggs in that basket. If they go rogue, then you have an issue. So the idea is that really what you want is Sally running the mail server, Bill running that server, somebody else running another server, somebody responsible for the routers. You want to separate those duties so that no single one entity has all the keys to the castle, so to speak, and all your layers of defense, right? And then the idea of rotation, pretty straightforward, but we don't want to have Sally keep doing that mail server forever. What if she decides to leave herself an account for when she gets fired, or she decides when she gets fired she's got to leave a logic bomb behind, delete everybody's mail in the history, get the company in trouble. They couldn't pass an audit, don't have any records anymore. Things like that. And it's rare, but we got to consider an insider as a potential threat. So, okay, if we rotate the duties, and then Bill becomes the mail admin and Sally goes to manage the database, assuming that happens on a fairly regular basis, one, it's great cross-training so that you're not so dependent on one person, but also it allows for that new person to come in and look at things, clean things up, set things up, and go, hold it. I just did an account audit. I found 2 extra accounts. I don't need them. We delete them, right? Worst case, that's all they do is clean it up. But then maybe they realize and tell management, hey, Sally was leaving some back doors. I closed them, but I just thought I'd let you know if you want to keep her around. She's probably doing the same thing now on the database server because she wants to have her back door. So we got to, be aware of those type of things. So defense in depth, though, is one of these topics that it's pretty straightforward, but you will use it again and again and again. If you think about it from the corporate point of view, the whole organization, yes, just like that castle, we need our firewalls, we need our intrusion detection, we need our policy, we need our antivirus, we need all these different layers, we need logging, monitoring, situational awareness, so we can, if and when it does happen, which it likely will, that we know we can respond. Because in many cases, sort of thinking that you're going to never have a breach or you're going to be able to prevent all of them is that's a false mindset. You want to try to, and that would be the goal, but you also have to then plan, as we're going to see, very detailed planning even about what you do if something does happen. But that's next week. So next week we will cover the last few lessons, last half of the course, go over further defense concepts, start to bring this all together after we introduce some of the frameworks that can help us in doing this process, and some of the regulatory and non-governmental entities that can provide us some information and guidance on setting up organizational policy. And we'll wrap it all up, and then we'll get you through this class and into the very heavy hands-on network foundations class as we set you up learning all about where it's really a review of networking. You should have some knowledge coming in. If you don't, then hopefully you'll get what you need from that class. It's pretty solid, but really what it is meant to do is introduce you to our virtualization tools and reinforce and review the networking concepts, as well as expose you to Linux and the command line, which many people even coming into our program most of them have say done a Windows networking course. And of course, that's important. And we cover Windows. We talk about Windows off and on throughout the program, of course. But as you get into what is really important from our point of view, from a security point of view, most of the tools we use and most of the technology is more command line driven. So that's a big change for a lot of students. So get ready for that. So anyway, see you next week. Since this is a new group, I'll do this last little sign off here. These take a little bit, I guess. You won't see until I get it in the LMS, but the standing procedure is I do my workshops. And then, of course, if people come, which this turned out to be a complete video, but many times people do show, there's time for question and answer, etc. And then once they're all done and recorded, I post them up and we'll update the LMS so you can access them. There's also a library if you want to go back and look at some of the older recordings. Probably not as useful in this class because I have a tendency to cover the same concepts, but maybe a different take, maybe a different example, different way I was saying it that day might help. But in some of the other ones, maybe different demos, things like that. But anyway, it's all available. I'll post it on the system, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.